This episode is brought to you by CBUSA. For nearly 2 decades, CBUSA has been helping independent home builders better their businesses, and it all began with a group of industry leaders just like you looking to do just that. As the nation's largest group purchasing organization in the residential construction industry, they're able to bring home builders together to compete, frankly, on a national scale. By getting builders to group together, you're creating a buyer group that is now going to help you negotiate better deals and better rebates, even nationally. If you're a local builder here in Minnesota, you're in luck because CBUSA is proud to announce that in Q1 of 24, they're coming to Minneapolis. So if you'd like to know more about this journey and be part of the builders here that are going to have advantages being the first ones in, please reach out to Ryan Lipchek from CBUSA. You can also listen to his story on episode 26 of The Curious Builder. This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19.5 years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. Find more at PellaNorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1 where I interview Peter and Ed together for a great listen on business and Pella windows.
We had one really unique one that just comes to mind now, but they were just a marvelous little family. They had 2 little young girls, and he was dying of cancer. And the only way they could pay for that home is when he died. And we started the house knowing that he would die, and he died right on schedule. And the family moved in, and he was just a delightful man. I can picture him right now, and I picture his little family.
Oh, wow.
But so he had some emotional things going through that, but we that was very, very rewarding.
All right, welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today I'm joined with a 30-year veteran who has now been retired for 20 years, my dad, David Williams. Welcome, Dad.
Thank you.
I thought over the holidays it'd be kind of fun to take a break, but I had this idea to bring you in and kind of get your story on record and chat a little bit. So a lot of people, obviously in Minnesota, will probably know your story, at least the older ones, but you have a great story to share. And so I thought we'd start a little bit from the beginning and tell us a little bit about the evolution of, I think at the time it was David A. Williams Construction. In 1970, I think you started construction, right?
That's right. Close to that, 70 or 71.
So before that, let's go a little bit back to your history of growing up in the service industry. Tell us a little bit about that and some of the flight background, because building was not something you even wanted to get into.
Well, I really never thought of much about what I was going to get into. As a kid, you don't really know, but we did grow up in a service station background. And so, and we lived close enough that I was young enough that we'd either walk or take our bicycles down. And before we were old enough to get up to wash windshields, we'd clean the bathrooms. And so just kind of, I remember it seemed like must have worked quite long hours, because we'd run home, grab something to eat. Mom would make hot dishes so we could all eat at different shifts, because we always needed to work. And I enjoyed it.
And that was in Anoka, right?
That was in Anoka. Yep.
I always laugh because that's the Halloween capital of the world. So every time Halloween would come around, I always think about Anoka. How far away was the service station from your guys' house?
Well, Dad had he had as many service stations as we've had houses, just about. But
wow.
He had 3 or 4 different stations, from Skelly to Standard Oil to Union 76 to and so there was a number of different brands. Probably the last one was the Skelly station. And so and just in a little town, so you kind of knew all the town folks and fond memories.
Now, were you guys also the mechanics as well? I mean, what did you all do for service? I mean, I know you changed oil, filled up gas, washed windows, but how far into, car mechanics did you and your brothers get?
My brother Dwayne, who's just a year and a half younger than I am, he was more into it than I was. I was and am a terrible mechanic. What it takes for most people to do in an hour takes me one day. And so, but I'd change oil and put studs in tires and and pump gas. Back then we always pumped the gas, and we always washed their windshield, and yeah, and they'd put in $2. So one of the big sales deals there was, do you want your car filled? So they'd say yes rather than just put in $2. And so I don't know, they could hardly go across town back then. I mean, cars didn't get that good of mileage back then, 10, 15 miles to the gallon. And so, I mean, they drive around the block and be back again for gas. I think maybe just so they have us wash their windshield. I don't know.
Well, if they weren't driving very far, it probably wasn't very dirty. So obviously through this, I assume through high school, then you were at the service station. That was your job, or did you have any other jobs?
Well, Dad also built a home or two, and we moved a fair amount as kids. And so we were Dad would build our own homes. And so we were kind of involved in that as far as what I recall, like cleanup and working or knowings of the subcontractors, et cetera. And so I don't know. But we really figured that the service station was really the business. But and as time went on, he probably built more and more, so he got involved more and more with construction toward the latter years of high school.
So was he building spec homes and then selling them, or was he building them for people for sale, pre-selling them?
I don't really remember.
Yeah,
I think I really don't remember. I mean, I probably both.
I mean, that would have been because you were born in 1950, so that probably would have been late 50s, early 60s. So definitely after World War II. I mean, there was kind of a big boom, like anywhere across the United States, I'm sure, of post-war veterans building homes, right?
Yeah, I suspect it was good. You don't pay much attention. You just see the people buying gas or the people building a house, but you don't really consider any of the business part of it, I think, as you're a youngster.
Yeah, of course not. So after high school, you went to junior college.
Yep, I went to Anoka Ramsey Junior College because it was inexpensive, it was close to home, and but I really wanted to get into flying. Somebody take me up in an airplane when I was, man, I would be in 7, 8 years old. I don't even know. Lyle Anderson from Princeton, and man, I was just hooked. I just wanted to fly. Anything I could do, I wanted to fly. And so that was kind of the dream that I wanted to do. And so everything I did after high school is really centered around that. So,
and that's when you went down to Omaha to the flight school, right?
It was actually in Oklahoma.
Oh, Oklahoma.
Ardmore, Oklahoma. They had a flight school down there, American Flyers. It's no longer there. It was an old Air Force base. And I got my private license when I was 16. So out at Anoka County Airport. And then, so I had a license, and then I went down there and got all the other multi-engine and instrument instructor and all that. So I was down there for a couple of years, as I recall, and it was accredited through a university down there. Can't remember the name of it either because we never went to campus there, but those credits transferred back to the University of Minnesota along with the credits that I had from Anoka Ramsey. And then I graduated in business from the University of Minnesota.
That would have been what, 68, 69, somewhere in there?
69, 70, yes.
Yeah. And was the goal originally when you went to flight school was to fly commercial airlines?
Yeah, I really wanted to fly commercial. And so I came back and flight instructed for a few years through college, kind of to help pay for college. And so I was able to do that and stay even, so to speak. And so, yeah, there was, and I think that was a huge thing for me because so many of the people that were trying to learn to fly were older. And so it was kind of a deal that I was communicating with people that later there was an age group above myself that could afford to buy a home. And so I was able to, I felt like that helped me communicate with them.
That's an
coming
interesting
out of
perspective.
Out of the flight instruction that I did. So
that would have been pretty unique then. I mean, you said you got your license at 16, or you were able to teach at 16?
No, I got my license at 16.
And what age were you when you were allowed to start teaching?
I suppose a couple of years later, so I was probably 18.
I mean, that's got to be pretty rare, especially at that time in right? That you'd have a 19-year-old kid, essentially, you're a teenager, teaching adults how to fly. That can't be that common.
No. Just I remember just being as poor as a church mouse. I had a little motorcycle. I don't remember if it was my dad's, because Dad sold motorcycles at the gas station or whatever. But and the motorcycle helmet law came into effect, so it must have been when I was about late 1960s, and I forgot my helmet and I didn't know what to do, so I grabbed a ice cream pail, those plastic ones, and put it over my head with a strap underneath my chin, and went to the airport. Wouldn't you know that a policeman saw me and stopped me, and I got a ticket for no helmet.
What, did you try to argue that you had a helmet on? It just wasn't a very good one?
Oh, I know I would have.
I've never heard that story before. That's amazing. Oh, wow. Okay. And so, because Vietnam was over in the mid 60s, early 60s?
Well, it was right about that time, and they were drafting everybody, and so for whatever reasons, I did not get drafted. So, but a lot of people that I went to high school with were in that, and I just call it luck or whatever you want to call it. But I was not. I didn't have to go into the service.
And at that time, then to again make ends meet, you were also doing private flights, right? You were flying. Who would pay for your services? Did you work for a company for charter flights? Because we had talked earlier that you had flew Hubert Humphrey a little bit around.
Some funny little things. That was for United Power Association out of Elk River, and so they had a deal. They flew power lines, and I don't remember exactly how I ended up doing that. I was actually going along we were looking for hunting season in particular, because hunters would shoot the insulators off of the telephone lines, and so we'd look for a broken insulator. So we had to fly very close.
Oh, wow.
And then
just to vandalize, people were just shooting telephone
well,
poles.
Something to shoot at. There's no deer, you got to shoot at something, and the glass, I'm sure, would just shatter. So we'd fly all these power lines.
I don't even know what that is. That's that little
Dakota.
glass thing you see on the top of telephone poles in like cartoons. Because I don't even think they even have those anymore.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah,
they would be tempting to shoot. Now that you mention it, I think they would actually be kind of interesting to shoot. But yeah, a little vandalism. So walk us through your flying around. So you're working with a charter flight, or who was arranging these flights?
What we call is a fixed base operator. I don't remember how I was that I worked for United Power Association, but for sure flying the power lines at one point, they had a small twin engine airplane, and I flew co-pilot on that, and we had Hubert Humphrey along. It was after he had been vice president. And I remember coming into, you're supposed to have, back then, I think you still have to have it, but a radio transmitter's license to talk on the radio, or you were supposed to have one. But Humphrey, he was an amazing politician, ignoring what side of the political spectrum you're on. The guy was brilliant. He could tie in families and names like it was unbelievable. But anyways, we'd fly him to these political things, and he'd have somebody along with him that would say that, that's John Smith's brother-in-law or some crazy thing, and he could pick up on anything. But anyways, we're coming into Minneapolis Airport, and it's a busy terminal, of course. It was busy then, and it's even busier now. But I gave the mic to Hubert Humphrey.
Oh, funny.
and he got permission for us to land.
Because he wanted to call the radio tower?
Well, I wanted him to call, because it was, so anyways, I put him on the radio to call the tower and get permission to land, is what I kind of remember. So.
Oh, that's funny. It actually reminds me, speaking of names and politicians, remember we were out skiing when we were kids, and we ran into Rudy Boschwitz. And I was thinking, because he looked like Abraham Lincoln, big tall hat, and he was a politician here in Minnesota for a number of years. And but his incredible, he walked right up to you and said, "Hey, David. Hi, Debbie. These are your kids, Mark and Ashley." And you hadn't seen him in decades, but he was somehow related to the plywood business, or he was associated somehow with building supplies or something.
Oh yeah, he was like, they had Minnesota something or other, but he had a major deal here in Minnesota that he did very, very, very well.
I just came to me now just to remember how amazing he was at names. It's one thing, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast, but obviously I've done Parade of Homes now for 20 years. You did the Parade of Homes for 30 years, and I wish I was better at names. I'm very good at faces. You see people come in your home time and time again, but oftentimes unless I have a meaningful interaction with them, sometimes it's hard for me to remember their names. Were you, during your career, especially with like the parade of homes and the number of people you saw, were you good at facial recognition, good at names, or neither, or both?
Well, I think facial recognition too.
Yeah.
I mean, some names you'd remember. What's always been rewarding for me all through the years is I just talked to somebody yesterday. I forgot to, but that I'd built for 50 years ago, and we're still close friends. And so some of these relationships that we did nearly 1,000 homes, just shy of 1,000 homes. So we spilled, and then so if you multiply that at minimum at 2 times that, because you got a husband and wife in most of the cases, and then all the kids, there's no way that.
Yeah, that's
But
a lot
it's
of names.
amazing how many I do remember.
So after you, and it was kind of, I remember as a kid, I mean, not knowing anything, like you said, you don't remember all that much about business as a kid. I just thought it was normal that your dad would have an airplane. And so, I mean, the number of airplanes that you had, I still think it's kind of funny that when you and mom met, I think it was 1979, I think your first date was on an airplane, and I was named after my uncle Mark, who died in a plane crash, and mom hated flying. And the first question you asked her was, "Do you like flying?" And her answer was yes. And then you flew her, you big romantic, to Wisconsin for a dinner date. I bet she was, I wonder how she handled that. She must have been okay. It must have been good weather that night.
She loved flying until we got married. And I might add, she also loved horses until we got married.
Oh,
And
boy.
so, yeah, just a funny visual. I don't know if I can explain it, but she went in, I told her to put a halter on a horse, and she came out. Somehow she got this thing strapped on the horse, but she had, on the face of the horse, she had the halter upside down. So she had holding the halter right between the horse's eyes, leading this crazy thing out of the stall.
It was either a blind horse or a very tame horse, because I don't think the horse would like that. Oh my, that's funny. All right, well, let's get to the building side of things. 1970, roughly, you started building, and you had mentioned at the time, I think it was because all the pilots had come back from Vietnam, got all the commercial jobs. That's why you did not continue to commercial flying. Is that right?
Well, they keep saying that it's going to open up next year and the next year and the next year. Long story, just flying never opened up. They could get a high time pilot that had flown jets coming out of the war and whatever, and so they coming out of a private practice like I had done, there really wasn't any jobs to do. So I decided to do either the service station or building, and I really I liked building. And so, anyways, I went to my uncle, and he gave me a few dollars out of his pocket so I could have spending money, and I don't remember how much, but it wasn't very much. And I started our first twin home, and I thought, well, if the dumb thing doesn't sell, I will rent it. Well, that person that bought 5 additional houses beyond that over the years. And
Was that Olmsted's?
No, that was Al Henderson.
Oh, funny, Al. Al bought your first house. No way. Oh, I wish the audience could meet Al Henderson. Oh man, wow, that's amazing. You obviously must have bought the land from somebody. So the money, or at that time, was it development? Did people, because I know things are a lot different then than they are now. And sometimes a developer would offer up their land and then you pay them at closing. How did you navigate paying your subcontractors, the house plans? Walk us through some of those early years of navigating that.
You didn't have to have that much money because, as a general rule, the subcontractors would wait to get paid until you had the house done. But also keep in mind, unlike today, I was just talking to somebody down in Florida, it takes them 6 months to get a building permit through. And we'd get a building permit in a few days, and we would have a good sized home done in 60 days. And so we could really, back then, we could turn them out. We had inspections, so I don't know why it had to go from 60 days to 6 months to a year and longer for bigger homes, but it was crazy. We'd build fancier homes, if you will, later, and some of those, we could get them done for the parade because we needed to rush them, but it wouldn't be unusual to say 90 days we can get that done, not a problem.
I mean, that's It's so hard to relate to. I remember that when I first started. I remember asking you. I remember for whatever reason, 120 days was in your original contracts. I started in 2005. You and Mom had been retired for about 4 years, and I remember looking at your old contracts, and I didn't know any better. My first house was a spec, and I know it took longer than 120 days. But to think about what we do now, 20 years past that, so 50 years past what you're talking about now. I mean, for me, it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months in design and probably, I think, 8 months to a year and a half to build the homes. And granted, they're much more complicated, much bigger, but even so, 90 days, 120 days, that's an outstandingly fast.
And some of them would do them in less than 30 days.
It's just unfathomable.
Mm-hmm.
I know, obviously, here in Minnesota, all across the country, one of the biggest topics of discussion for zoning and planning and even building is affordability. And obviously, the time you started, there were no national builders, at least in Minnesota. And I guess the other huge advantage you had was for cash flow management. If all your subcontractors were willing to wait till the end, which doesn't sound like they had to wait very long, it really allowed you to not need money to build a house. So the barrier of entry was probably quite low.
Sometimes we would have $500 or $1,000 down until closing. And so it wasn't unusual. We had one really unique one that just comes to mind now, but they were just a marvelous little family. They had two little young girls, and he was dying of cancer. And the only way they could pay for that home is when he died. And we started the house knowing that he would die, and he died right on schedule. And the family moved in, and he was just a delightful man. I can picture him right now, and I picture his little family.
Oh, wow.
But so he had some emotional things going through that, but we that was very, very rewarding from the construction standpoint to see young families moving into your homes, and the kids were all excited, and the parents were all excited, and these were even relatively modest homes back then, but that was very, very rewarding and continues to be so. And you'll see people that you built for. I met a kid out in Montana. He grew up in one of our homes, and his parents still owned it like 30 years later. But those things are very rewarding over the years.
I think, you touched on something pretty special that you and I have talked about a number of times, but whether you're living in a tent or a $5 million house or whatever, home is really where your family is. And the memories that are created there, it is a pretty special privilege as home builders to construct something that is a place for all these family moments to exist. And, a lot has been shared, not necessarily on this podcast, but I don't think just because you build a more expensive home necessarily changes that dynamics. Meaning that every home has special memories, and so while we're very privileged to build very high end and very nice homes, at the end of the day, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're building for families, and that really is part of the main joy of, I think, when you ask builders why they get into it and why do they do what they do, or the subcontractors, why do they do it? That's one of the biggest things, is that they get to work for families, and building a home is an essential need, just like food. What, in those early years, you were building how many homes a year at that time?
Well, it seemed like we made a jump from about 4 or 5 homes in those first few years, and that was pretty amazing, really. But we jumped up to that 30, 35 range, and we probably did between 30 and 45 homes a year. So that's how it worked out to, and that's pretty much what we stayed. We'd have 5 or 6 during those good years. We would have 4 or 5 models going, but then houses just sold. So every 60 or 90 days, you're just pumping out start another model and close on that one. So there were, we had a lot of good years building. And I used to tell other builders that, don't get too set that you're doing such a great job. We're building in a great economy. And if you build nice homes, they're going to sell. And that's kind of the way it was. And those people at that time, too, homes were really, it was consistently going up. And so if you bought a home today for 200,000-300,000, the next year it'd be worth considerably more. They would make more on them in a year or two than I made building the things. And so that was rewarding for me as well.
I remember I've actually used that as a sales line before, that just the idea that if people ever had an issue with how much money you made on a house, or it's mostly perceived, because, frankly, if you never told me this, by the way, getting into business, that becoming a builder is not a way to become wealthy or rich. In fact, it's a good way to lose your shorts. But anyway, the point of it is the appreciation that the homes would gather. You always, I remember asking you this as a young kid, asking you, like, did you ever feel bad making money, still figuring out, like, how does one navigate this world of business? And you said just what you just said. It gave you a lot of satisfaction that, well, you had a good living and we had a lot of privileges because of owning your own business and becoming a builder, that ultimately the people you built for not only got to enjoy a beautiful home, but they actually made significant money off of it. And that gave you a lot of peace and satisfaction. So that was I've used that a number of times as, I navigate these same conversations with, clients in today. I
Yeah.
mean, because sometimes, obviously you'll see someone who sells their home and you're like, well, man, I know I built that for $1 million. They just sold it for 1.4. Like, and I'm happy about it. Like, it doesn't, that's the other thing. Like, it doesn't actually, I mean, I'm glad that their home appreciated. I mean, you built something that's really valuable and good.
Mhm.
How now your Uncle Jeff or your brother worked for you in those early years as well. Walk us through. Did you have an office manager or secretary early on? When did Jeff come on to be a site manager? How big was your team in those early years?
Well, my team really stayed the same. All I had was a secretary and somebody out in the field, and I kind of seemed like I ran the sales. And that was, I don't remember how long I would have run the sales before. I really felt like, in many respects, I needed a secretary more than I needed a foreman, because I could get out in the field early on, and so, but somebody to help or coordinate between the buyer and what they wanted built, and to keep that up. And so, but most of my career, I had simply a foreman and a secretary, and that was it. And really, up until the very end, that's so I had a relatively small operation, and yeah, a number of people that had similar operations had a lot more overhead than I did, but we were able to make it work. There was one particular plan that we built, was a modified 2-story, and um, it was we built 250 of those, just this, basically the same home. We changed little things and we'd come up with new names. It was called the Aspen, and that was a tremendous little house for us, and we built a lot of those. So it depended. Yeah.
But you always built to the market. I remember even as an early kid, when I was going to start building, you encouraged me at that time. You'd already been out of it for 4 or 5 years. And you encouraged me to go on the Parade of Homes and look at 20, 30, 40 homes, find out which ones sold the best, figure out why it sold the best, and then build something similar to that. Tell us a little bit about the Aspen, because that's essentially the evolution of that Aspen plan that you were so successful. I mean, that was a quarter of the homes that you built over 30 years was essentially the same plan.
True enough. And that was when I see the marketing that Mark goes through today. I mean, we were archaic by comparison. So the Parade of Homes was a huge thing for us, because we would get new people in, and it would reaffirm people that, like Mark has, where people come back and see your product year after year. It was kind of cute, because we always, after you look at enough homes, they all start looking alike. And so one of the things we did was put a little train track around one of the bedrooms, and it'd go out into the hallway and come back. And after they look at a dozen homes and the little kids are there, they all blend together. But they remember that there was a house with a little train track that ran through it. So you try to come up with something that they would remember your house with. And so, yeah. And really, when they came to see our houses, they weren't coming in to see wow. They were coming to see our homes, um, that we can afford this, and we can have a home like this. And little Johnny would run through the house, and Sarah would run through the house another way, and they'd all pick out their little bedrooms and come back all smiling and happy and jumping up and down with their parents. And so, yeah, it was very rewarding.
That first plan, that Aspen, where did you had seen that plan? Was it out in Seattle, or or that was someone local? I mean, it was something you improved upon, right?
Um, we did both the Street of Dreams, so more expensive homes, and we also did what they call the Street of Reality. So we did we got into the Street of Reality show, which was very good for us as well. And so we got in the second year that they had that, and I just simply asked the people that promoted it, what was your best seller? And they said this little modified two-story. I said, well, that's the one I'll build, and I did. And then it kind of took off. We'd done similar plans to that before, but so I knew exactly what it was, and we just took off on that little plan, and it was affordable, and it was a very, very livable house, and that was a successful plan. But of course, we built another 700 homes that were different than that too. So
I always thought it was funny that someone else, and you and I don't get offended by this kind of thing, maybe because you're my dad and you taught me not to be offended by it. But like this idea of, imitation is a form of, flattery. And so someone came through your house, liked it so much, took the plan off the table, started building it down the street, modified 2 stories, and he didn't call it the Aspen. He called it the NASPA. Aspen spelled backwards. Oh man, I always thought that was hilarious. And you were fine with it. It didn't bother you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true.
This episode is brought to you by Adaptive, the software for builders that automates draws, budgets, and bookkeeping with AI. For over a year now, I've been partnered with Adaptive, and they've just been an amazing game changer in terms of efficiency in our time and all our bookkeeping. From the time we get an invoice, we import it into their system. The AI codes it, cost codes it, job codes it. All we have to do is review it, pass it through the people internally in the office, all digitally, and then it gets approved and paid all via ACH. It's becoming extremely fast and saving us countless hours a day and a week. When it comes to draws, all of our budgets now are set in Adaptive as well. So now when we cost code against the draws, we can do our change orders, and then with a click of a button, we can submit these draws to our title companies or to our homeowners for faster payment. If you're looking to save time, and if you're looking to be accurate, I highly recommend Adaptive. Additionally, if you'd like to listen to one of their founders share the story of Adaptive, you can listen to episode number 15 on the Curious Builder Podcast. Lake Society magazine is Minneapolis' premier target market boutique lifestyle and design publication. It embodies the unique lifestyles and design of the Minneapolis City Lakes neighborhoods. From Lake of the Isles to Lake Harriet, it showcases the best in local design projects by both premier builders, architects, and interior designers in this area. Lake Society magazine has the look and feel of a national publication with glossy covers, high-end finishes. It's mailed directly to upper bracket single-family homeowners in the City Lakes area, and it's the perfect local coffee tabletop publication. Subscriptions can also be available through the website lakesocietymagazine.com. Additionally, publisher and founder Karen Steckel has over 27 years in the local magazine publishing industry and has a passion for high-end photography and quality graphics. Her commitment to quality, visual simplicity, and beauty are strongly reflected in her beautiful Lake Society magazine. So Uncle Jeff, your brother, worked for you for what, a decade? How long did Jeff work with you? In the 70s?
I don't really know, probably for 10, 15 years. And then he went on his own for 10, 15 years. And then we finished our careers together. And it went very, very well, actually. And so I had a great brother, and he probably liked the field and was better at it than I was. Mm-hmm. I seemed to like the business side of it more. And so we had we think a lot alike, but we both of us had in our private companies, we did well, and together we did even better.
Yeah, that's a cool story. We've had a couple of other, son and father teams on the podcast, and husband and wives. I haven't had brothers on. I think at some point it'd be fun to bring Jeff on to talk about his perspective as well. I remember, just triggered here, as a kid, you used to always tell me that you could be a good builder and you could be bad at business and you won't make it. And you could be good at business and you could be a bad builder and you would make it. And hopefully you're good at both. You described yourself early on as people used to call them suitcase builders, or, we've talked about it now that, you own a business that happens to be building. But for a long time, that wasn't something that was probably appreciated like it is today. Did you ever face any flack that you didn't frame homes yourself or any of that kind of stuff, or that was never really a thing?
Well, still, you tell people you were a builder. You're a carpenter.
Yeah.
And I couldn't hardly drive a nail in, still can't, without bending it. And so, It's but I love carpentry. I've worked all the trades. I have utmost respect. I think, and I really believe that well, customers, we've talked mainly about those that bought our homes, but I cannot say enough about the subcontractors that really that we had for years and years and years on end, and very few of them did you have to change. Certain trades, it seemed like more than others, but there are so many of them, and they became lifelong friends and still are. And that again is a reward that has carried forward as well.
That's funny you say that because just recently, a company, so DJs, Don Savitsky, I mean, you worked with him your entire career, right?
Correct.
And so that was 30 years. He's worked with me my entire career for 19 years. We'll be coming up on 20 in May. They just sold their company here in the last 8 years. So 50 years, our HVAC company has been one company. And it's funny how that the new company I heard is only really interested in service. And it's actually been kind of sad because that relationship, for me, it was Rick and Tom and seeing them and talking to them all the time. And Tom came up to me at the basement of one of our recent homes, and he came over and he shook my hand. He's a pretty stoic dude, and you could see tears in his eyes. And he just said, I goes, I don't know if I'm going to see you again, but I just wanted you to know that I appreciate you and your family and all the years that we've had together. And first, it's a little bit like, I mean, for him to say that is super emotional because he's a pretty stoic guy. But to your point, these are some pretty long-standing relationships that it does make it very rewarding. Just because it's a people business, we're building homes for people, but the people you get to be in the trenches with, they also care what they're doing.
So that same person just texted me a week ago, "Happy holidays."
Tom did.
Mm-hmm.
He's first class, man. He's first class.
And the plumber I had him for my entire career, and Mark has had him, and he was a guy we both Jeff and I gave him a few dollars to get started with in business, and he was working with his dad, and he wanted to do his own thing, and so it went from his dad to him. And
that's Brad and Rick, right?
Right.
Yeah, and Brad passed away about a year ago, actually.
Right.
And so now Rick and his son Mitch are still carrying on the plumbing generation. So there'd be third generation. And so, but anyway, so that part is really cool. It's pretty rare that happens, especially as you get different platforms in building. Sometimes the subcontractor base, depending on what the skill set is, may not be able to, come up. But it's been pretty amazing to watch the trade partners that we, as long as they work hard and they care about what they're doing. So just with those two things, you can pretty much do anything if they're willing to do it. And they have been, we've definitely asked them to do some pretty crazy things over the years. And speaking of the plumbers, I remember on my own house, I don't know if you know the story, I used to put in my own drain tile. And I was building a house out in Chaska, and we used to take these 10-inch, 12-inch railroad spikes and drive them through the drain tile because I liked interior and exterior drain tile. Well, long story short, I knocked it through. About 5 months later, Tom, Andreessen, I guess I always call him Tom Grupa, but he's not a Grupa. Anyway, he looks like Popeye for those that don't know who I'm talking about. He's got forearms the size of my thighs. And anyway, he comes over and he said, Mark, he goes, you owe me lunch and a shirt. I'm like, why is that? He goes, because I just spent the last 4 hours fixing a hole you made. So that spike, somehow I drove it right through the water main of the house. Those are the copper ones, not the new PVC ones they have. Well, it must have just got into it and somehow sealed it, so the water didn't manifest itself for a long time. Luckily, he stopped it. But you can imagine those big Popeye arms trying to get down at the concrete, ripping it out and changing out the water line underneath the footing. Needless to say, I bought him a lunch, and definitely he has shirts for life. So. But I bailed him out one time. I have long arms. I remember he called me one time on one of his job sites, and I forget what it was. It was something down in a trap, or I don't know where it was. And he said, I know, it was a 6-inch PVC pipe, and there was something stuck in the bottom of it. And anyway, I got my arm all the way down to my shoulder, and I was able to grab it. He couldn't get his fingers through that thing. And so anyway, I guess to each their own. We each have a unique skill set. So Mom came along in 1980. She did your interior design. Did you feel like at that time, because you had mentioned before, what was something that set you apart, and you thought Mom's interior design, the way that she was able to connect with, obviously the Mrs. home buyers as well. How did interior design sort of elevate your brand compared to other builders?
Well, I think I matured as a builder and as a businessman really about that time. So I'd been building for nearly 10 years, but really the success that we had or didn't have, but the, well, I definitely feel like my wife definitely had a huge influence on making the business more successful. And one of the things we offered is that um, we offered her as a free service to be able to help people decorate. And she knew so little about it. She's colorblind, but she has a way with people and she has a way with colors, even though she's color deficient. And the people just loved her. And so where I lacked, she just shined. And really, she did that through my until we retired. And really, any successes that we had was really attributed to her. I often tell her that we were in this together, and she did. It was she was an amazing helpmate to in the building.
Hmm. I mean, she's 73, same age as you are, and she told me the other day she's running 6 remodels right now. As an interior designer, right? Because she just so loves to help people. I early on in my career, before I knew what interior designers were in terms of like paying them and all that kind of stuff, mom was more than happy to help her son, of course, who wouldn't help your kids. And so those early years, mom was very helpful. And in fact, I've had a number of clients that even to this day, I was like, oh, I loved working with your mom, or the family operation, or, of course, even now with our parade of homes, sometimes from a staffing standpoint, it's always important to me because we aren't a big company. And because in many ways, I am the company in terms of my personality and the relationships that we build with our clients. But at our parade homes, I'm always insistent that I be there for the whole parade. Now, my wife is also very helpful in allowing me to do that because it's a big burden with 3 kids. Thursday through Sundays to be at the parade of homes. But I feel like that's pretty paramount for our brand. But I bring up mom because mom will usually volunteer her hours and help on the weekends. In fact, even on weekends, I don't ask her to show up. She shows up anyway. And I can't tell you how many times people will disappear into the house and, an hour later, they'll come down like, oh, we just had the greatest conversation with your mom talking about, design in your career. And so even to this day, she's a pretty outstanding, salesperson on top of being an incredible person. So
If you want a designer, she'll work for free.
that's true. She does like to design. Walk us through some of the challenges that you had in your career. Like any business owner, business is hard. I don't remember the exact years, but you at some point you were facing 20% interest rates. This last year with inflation here in the United States, I think we were at 7-8%. Interest rates were the highest that I've seen in my building career at 8%. We've had a few contracts cancel because of it. But we've also had historic lows, 0, 1%, 2%. Looking back at you sharing, how you got through 20% interest rates seems just unfathomable. How did you navigate those years?
Well, I was thinking you and I talked about it briefly, but I think starting business was, like, what do I do? Do I build a house? Do I try to sell it? What am I going to do? What are the risks? And I think identifying risk is a huge part of being in any business. And so you try to identify risk. And then we hit those Carter years where it was unbelievable. It did go to 20% interest. And so builders were paying 20% um, fees for people to get loans. And those loans were like at 8%. And so by the time we got a profit in there, and by the time you put in that other 20%, um, it was they were difficult. A lot of builders did not make it. I honestly don't know how we went through those times, but somehow we came out shining on the other side of it. And so, um, uh, yeah, that was an amazing thing. And then the other one that really sticks in my mind is that you'd think sheetrock. Well, gypsum. Anybody can make sheetrock. And so we had a sheetrock shortage, and it lasted for quite a while. But we had a real good. Shear Brothers did an amazing job on supplying their customers with sheetrock, but they literally stopped the industry. I mean, you could not get sheetrock.
Would they do anything else? I mean, would you do plywood and paint it? I mean, is there any
No,
way around it?
no. I mean, I don't know anything that would be halfway reasonable. So, but somehow we were able to get through that period. That was, but there were always these things. I always said we were either busy being busy or busy trying to get busy. One of my little
I just
things.
used that quote yesterday, actually.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think we worked hard. We had a marvelous lifestyle. The kids, we had Mark and Ashley, but we had a marvelous lifestyle. We weren't the rich and famous, but we had a marvelous uh, time raising our family. And so it was great. But we also worked very hard, long hours, conscientious, and there's just like any small business like that, the entrepreneur takes, I mean, you working with insurance, you're working with building products, you're working with subcontractors, you're working with buyers, et cetera, et cetera. And then trying to look ahead so you find land and where you're going to build and what you're going to build. And so there was a lot of stress associated with it as well.
One of the things that you have done that I didn't really do in my career, and actually we're just looking at some small developments now, but Vasco Bernardi, came over here in the '70s, bought hundreds of acres of land in Chaska, Eden Prairie area, and you and a couple other builders would, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the mini developers. They kind of disappeared in 2008 after you retired. Obviously we had a major downturn from 2008 to 2011, 12, if you will, and I feel like the middle developers are the ones that went bye-bye as the national builders kind of came onto the scene and really had the pockets to withstand a lot of this stuff. But walk us through those early years of what that meant. You would go and have a development, but you weren't actually developing the land till later in your career. Can you speak a little bit to just that relationship with developers and how that played a role in building homes?
Yeah, I mean, it was another relationship. So the one Mark just mentioned, as far as Vasco was he was an engineer, came out of Italy, built a lot of stuff in Italy, went to Mexico City, built a number of high rises, and then they ended up here in Minneapolis. And he's since gone, but he was an amazing guy, and he developed a lot for small builders like myself. And there were a number of developers, or somebody would have a piece of land. I'm thinking of one in particular over in Eden Prairie, and it was a great site. And I don't know, we had 15, 20 lots there that we had tied up with who knows what, probably shoelaces of mine. I don't know. I mean, we didn't have, I don't know how but anyways, and we'd start building in the way they'd sell. And so it was, for our economy back then, we really counted on the small developers that developed land for us as well.
Do you remember? So, like you always talked about good competition, and the name Pete Kerber comes to mind. We moved to Chaska in 1986. I was 6 at the time, and we built our house over on Lake Bavaria, and now Cheval and a bunch of other communities are around that area. But the Kerbers were always there, and Klingle huts come to mind.
Gary Gorham.
Yeah, I don't remember some of these names, but walk us through a little bit about the community of builders. Were they all part of the building association, the Parade of Homes? Is it because of the proximity? You guys were just kind of close to each other? Because you always kind of viewed it as like it was good, kind of the rising tide floats all boats. I feel like you were maybe a little bit ahead of your time in terms of understanding that by having multiple good builders as options, it actually raised the bar, or it raised the industry as a whole.
Um, Good competition is just good competition. I don't know. And we won a lot of Reggie awards, and which is basically what I considered you had the best value in that price range. And so that was always rewarding. But those that you considered some of your best competition when you could win against them was rewarding. I think of Gary Gorham in particular, because he was probably early on in my career. And so if he'd win what I didn't like coming in second. I wanted to be first. And so it didn't mean you couldn't afford to lower your price, but you just tried to do a better job on construction and making the whole thing work. And Mark, he was from the north side of the city, and the ones Mark mentioned were from the south side of the city. But there were a lot. It was an industry that I built like high standards as far as their personal life and carried forward into their business life, and so it was very rewarding.
The parade of homes, you had already mentioned a little bit about the train tracks and secret doors, and that's something I would say I'd call you a bit of a showman. And it's something that obviously I'm a combination of both you and Mom's personality, but I would say I one thing that I really enjoy doing is being a showman to our homes. Like I love to sort of show people the home that you built. And I know most builders would be this way, but I've had people over the years come up to me and they say, we chose to build with you because years ago, but when we couldn't afford a house, you would come over and talk. And this was a young couple at the time they came through. They were probably in their young 20s. I built from when they were about 30. And they said, we interviewed a lot of builders, but it was because of how you interacted with us and didn't treat us any different, even though everyone knew that we couldn't afford to build a house. It was the way you engaged with us that we said, someday we're going to build with you. I feel like I learned that from both you and Mom and how you were hospitable towards everyone that came into your homes. And I remember going to the parade of homes, as a kid. And I remember going to showroom selections with Mom. I couldn't have been more than 6, 7 years old. And for whatever reason, the memory comes to me now, like B&B Carpet One. They had a little play set. Man, I'm dating myself. I mean, I remember playing with like Fisher Price toys while Mom was probably working with your clients. It was like bring your kid to work day. Anyway, I think it speaks to the unique characteristics of building a home for families. And that wouldn't be a turnoff because as a family building for families, I have to believe there's some mutual attraction and relatability between the two parties.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond. It's rewarding that you have fond memories of stuff, just all of it working together. For most of my career, it's kind of interesting, but I had an office at home, and we operated. Sometimes we had a separate building of where we lived. We moved a lot just because we put our house up for sale along with those other models, and because we had a few dollars worth of furniture in the house, that was the house that would sell. And I'd come home and, honey, we're moving again. Oh, really?
Mom's, I mean, and now having a family, I don't know how you guys moved as often as you did. As a kid though, I have no recollection of it really. It just seemed normal. You don't know any different. And I think because kids are so resilient and so pliable, I think sometimes as parents now, being a parent of 3, I'm sure the kids would be just fine. It's really as parents how we're trying to do the best we can, just like you guys did. I think from 1986 to I think 1999, you guys stayed in this. That's the longest you've ever lived in any house in your entire life. Is that right? Other than probably the one you grew up in? Or not even that
well,
one?
even the one we grew up in, my dad kind of in the same way. Later, when I would have been in my teen years, we moved a fair amount
Yeah.
as well. And so the longest thing we ever owned was a place. We had a little cabin in Montana,
Right.
and that was the longest we lived. But we lived in a couple of those houses about 6, 7, 8 years, and we moved close to 20 times. And so
I always laugh because our family is known for selling anything. And Mom has always been amazingly willing to move, but later in life, I think she even likes to move and keeps changing. So I think she's either always been that way or has liked it. But I remember the story where you guys were going to move into that house real close to the office here in Excelsior. It was over in Shorewood or Chanhassen. And anyway, it was at the end of the cul-de-sac. It had been in the parade. Mom was shutting off the lights and a lady came in at 6 o'clock and Mom had shut off all the lights. And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I wanted to come in and see the house." And Mom, of course, like, "Well, of course, come right in." So she turned all the lights back on and she toured her through the house. They had a great conversation. And then the next day, you guys were going to move into that house. All the boxes were in the garage and you came in and you said, "Honey, I've got bad news for you." And she's like, "You sold it to that lady last night, didn't you?" And it was a Twins relief pitcher who had just signed a contract. And so here she is ready to move into her house and, has to, move right back out. Where did you guys go after that?
I have no idea. Probably one of the other models we had someplace or apartment. I don't know. But
Oh man, that she's been pretty flexible over the years. That's for sure. What transitioning a little bit from as we kind of come into the end of the podcast, walk us a little bit through. So you built for 30 years. I built now for 20. What are and you've always said, hey, it only takes a year or two and you feel like you're sort of out of the pulse of, what's happening in some ways. What are some big changes that you've seen from your career to what you've observed in the 2 decades I've had my career in building?
night and day. Construction, 2x6 walls and the windows and so much of that. They've had small improvements through the years, so there's no question about that. I think the houses today are better than we built 20 years ago. I think the houses we built 20 years ago are way better than the houses they built 20 years before that. But the marketing today and the social media is, I mean, it's like from outer space for me. I mean, even sitting here in front of this microphone, it just, um, so how we communicated with our secretary, I had a secretary that had a rather loud voice. And so we would just yell back and forth at each other. And if you knew her, you would.
Is this Margaret?
Yeah, she was a marvelous, marvelous lady. She still has my checkbook, and she usually tells me you don't need that when I ask.
She was my first. She was my first office manager.
Yeah, she's a basic lady, and so it was just these things. I had other secretaries, but she was the bulk of my business for many, many years. I don't know, maybe 20 years, and these 20 years since then. So she's been around a long time and been a huge help to me. But anyways, she lives now about 10 miles away, and I still think we can use the same intercom system because she has a rather loud voice, and I do too.
Just roll up the windows and yell outside. I like that. From a obviously, you've had huge communication changes, right? I mean, at the time, I think you said when Mom met you, you had one of the first mobile phones, and it was the size of this table. You said it'd plug into your what? It'd plug into your little lighter, I would assume, on the console for power, or what?
I think that's why she married me, because she thought I had money, because she didn't know anybody else with a telephone. And it was this great big suitcase thing. And so you'd drive down the road and I'd talk to her all the way home. It was just kind of at the beginning of phones. And so it was, anyways, it was kind of interesting. I don't know I could even afford that crazy telephone, but when you're a small little operation, you could call people. So, and it was be scratchy and everything else, and short of coverage and etc.
You know, again, going to communication, obviously email, internet. I remember later on in your career, right towards the end, it was Mr. Orlowski. Do you remember him?
No.
He was actually my teacher in high school. Internet was just coming out of the scene. I remember you paying him to set up your first website.
Oh, funny.
And but anyway, for whatever reason, that name comes to me right now. But
I don't even remember having a website.
Well, I do. I'm hesitant to share this story, but do you remember the time it got hacked?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You have to share this story.
Well, no, somebody called me and somebody hacked it and put porn on there.
Yeah, this is like no one even knew what that was at the time.
No, it was crazy, but we got rid of it really fast. So, I mean, now you hear about different things, but I mean, I don't know.
You were ahead of your time. That would have been, I remember that. It was like 1999, 1998. Because I remember I was a junior, senior in high school and heard that story. And I remember talking to Mr. Orlowski because you called him in to help you solve it. I don't know if you guys changed domains or whatever, but yeah.
We didn't even know what a domain was.
Right.
I didn't, at least.
I'm sure there's lots out there that still don't. Obviously the internet's been a huge help in terms of communicating. Even this podcast, essentially it's like radio, except you can listen to it on your phone anytime you want, things like that. So in some ways, while it's a new form of communication, the way it operates is actually somewhat similar, which is, I think, why people resonate with it, just sharing stories and hearing people chat about, their careers and their business. And I think that's the powerful, as we can share. I was lucky enough to have a dad and a family of builders. I mean, it's kind of odd that my uncle built on both sides of my family, grandparents. I mean, I have a lot of building all around me. It seems almost laughable that I had zero interest in building when everyone around me was building, and then everyone retired, and then I started building. So it's sort of ironic now, sitting here 20 years later, interviewing you about building.
The one thing that comes to mind that I still think the order of things hasn't changed, and the fact that Parade of Homes, you meet people face to face. And then you have the telephone, and then you have social media. And I think sometimes the society now goes from social media, goes the other way around.
Opposite.
But you still need that. You still like and thrive on that. And it comes down still to your gut feeling with who you're working with, whether it be a subcontractor, or one of your people that built homes with you or whatever, and future relationships. It's still that one-on-one.
I would agree with you, except I would add this, that there is no substitute for being in person. And obviously, if you're going to build a house, you're going to likely spend a lot of time with that building group that you pick. I will say that social media does allow you to get a sense of who that person is before meeting them. Before it's a phone book, it might just be a name, where usually one of the first things people will do if they're interested in a company is they'll go to the website, they'll go to their social media pages, especially if they're showing their people. And some people elect to show only their work, which is fine. It stands for itself. Many architects, you would not know who they are, and their work speaks for itself. I've elected, for good or for bad, to highlight, try equal measures of both the work that we produce, but also the personality of our team, because relationship building is so important to any home building. And I feel like I want the client to know, for better or for worse, whether they want to engage with me, because, we have 3 kids. You taught me balance, I think, very well, in terms of, like, we love to work, but I don't live to work. I love what I do, but I don't need to do it every second of the day. I have so many hobbies, and like you've been retired now for 20 some years, and you've got 87 hobbies going on. People sometimes will say, well, what are you going to do when you retire? And I'm like, that is not going to be a problem. I have a lot of hobbies. And do you remember the advice you gave me about hobbies?
No.
If you're going to have hobbies as an old person, have hobbies as a young person. So mission accomplished.
He's done well with that.
What do you recall? Because I usually end the podcast kind of on this note with talking about how you educate yourself. I don't recall. How did you self-educate? Were you a big book reader in terms of business? I've gotten a lot of value over the last couple of years in really meeting with other builders, sharing ideas, and reading business books like I've never done before. How did you get inspired, and how did you, because I know you're a highly curious person like myself, how did you feed that itch for learning?
Well, I'd go to seminars. They'd have different building deals around the country, and so I would go to those, and that was helpful. I always thought that one of the things that I missed, having a small popcorn stand, what I called, was interacting with other people. Like in a large corporation, you got a division, and you got a dozen very smart people around you, and so I missed a lot of that deal. But I think because I was curious and still am curious, to find out why the plumber's a plumber, and find out why why a builder is doing this, or why a builder is successful, why he isn't successful. And so I think analyzing it, probably there weren't a lot of stuff to read, but the seminars were very, very helpful over the years. And then just being in the marketplace doing it was a huge help.
Mm-hmm. I just thought of it while you were chatting about that, about learning. I think, like you, I don't think a lot about regrets. I'm sure if I thought about it, do I regret a certain decision because I could have had a more fortuitous outcome? Of course. But like true regrets, I have very few. But one that just came to mind is in 2009 and 10, when things were really, really slow. I had purpose. I'm like, well, if I have this much time, I've always, because I've not really been a handy builder, turns out even less handy than you, I think. But the point of it is I wanted to go 2 weeks and work with every single subcontractor in the field, because I also greatly respect their trade. So I wanted to work 2 weeks with the cabinet shop, 2 weeks hanging drywall, 2 weeks painting, in an effort to better understand not only their craft, but to show them that I appreciate what they did. That's one of the only regrets I have that I did not do. And it's because your line of, are you busy being busy, or are you busy getting busy? And man, when you have nothing going on, you are absolutely scrambling trying to build a house. And those years were so lean. I remember even I couldn't get enough sales for my own company, so I had one home going, I remember, but I was the project foreman for another builder for about a year and a half, just to put some coins in the meter, if you will. And so the idea that I would have 2 weeks, times however many trade partners there are, a couple of months of time, I didn't have that time. I'm actually, even my mind right now thinking about it, like if I allocated 1 week a year, I probably still could scratch that itch if I really tried. But anyway, did you ever have an interest in trying to explore some of the other trades during your career?
Yeah, I think so. I think, we made round top windows for a major lumberyard here in Minneapolis. And So I had hired somebody and bought some equipment, and so I got interested in woodworking, which I still do. And so so there are a lot of, I think, on the different trades. I mean, from plumbing to, I mean, I think I have a grasp of all of them. And I enjoy that. And so I can fix stuff, but like it was back in the automotive build, I can fix just about anything on a car or in a house, but it just takes me 10 times longer.
Right.
And part of that's maybe age, I don't know, but it just takes longer to try to do it. It doesn't pay to do it. I might as well get a job at McDonald's and hire somebody, but I enjoy doing it. So,
Right.
yeah.
That's funny. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Usually we end the show with people sharing their websites and how to get a hold of you, but we don't have a website. So if anyone wants to get a hold of you, they can contact me on my website, and you can have a cup of Joe with David. So thanks for coming on, Dad, and thanks for joining the Curious Builder Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder Podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at CuriousBuilderPodcast.com.